this issue of collective responsibility, uh, it's very problematic in our society because everybody takes no responsibility because there is a collective. It's a very big thing, and you can either laugh at it. But when you get appointed, there is no collective appointments. You advertise a job, you describe a job, and it's got responsibility. But when people mess up in the job, they say, no, I didn't make the decision alone, I made it with so and so. But it is your job. So I often heard this, I think, in my inquiry with people. And when you pin them down, you found that actually they made the decision. As I say, we use things to protect ourselves rather than to actually take responsibility. So I think we must be very careful when we talk about collective responsibilities that it doesn't get abused to the point where people get appointed and then to go and do misdemeanors, and then they are covered up by this so-called collective responsibility. Let me give you a specific example in this case. In one of the memos I received was that the decision to deinstitutionalize, it's actually in my report, was taken in Honorable Makura's office. That is what was said. And if you read English carefully, it doesn't say it was taken by Makura. It says it was taken in his office. It doesn't even tell you whether he was there in the office or not. So if you don't read English carefully, you realize this may be actually, as the minister said, you use somebody's name to cover up for what you were doing. So I had to confront the Honorable Premier and ask him, what actually took place in your office? And the answer was nothing ever took place in his office about deinstitutionalization. So as I say, if you just gloss over it, you would have said, oh my God, this thing was actually taken in the Premier's office. Therefore, it has got the stamp of David as the Premier. And actually, nothing ever took place in his office, first of all. He wasn't there. There was never a meeting in relation to this matter. At least on record, that's what he said, unless, he's covering up. But you had to ask. But remember that even the sentence that said that told you that they were clear that they were covering something. They didn't say it was taken by him or in his presence or he was part of the meeting. They just said we were in his office. So you could be in my office and mess around, but should I take responsibility for you making a decision in my office? The answer is no. So these are the issues that come up. Now, this issue of fear again, and it comes to the issue of independence. In our country, we have a constitution that tells us exactly how to live and how to do things. And how often do we actually subterfuge that constitution in the way we conduct ourselves? So you can have a law and you can actually filibuster around the law and not practice it. So you give, there's a saying that we are in power but not in charge, or something like that. You can have these things happening. So you give somebody a false type of independence that is legal and it's in writing, but in practice that's not what was happening. So the oversight board in Gauteng, who appointed the MEC, is not appointed independently. So you make the first rule wrong. It's appointed by the person that they are going to oversee, and therefore they feel beholden to that person. Secondly, that person can also appoint lackeys because she's the one who appoints. So although the law is there, its practice is incongruent with what is happening. So the reason why, I don't disagree that they are responsible. They actually, if you read my report, they accepted that they were responsible they accept responsibility and accountability. But but I think we mustn't assume that what is law is what is happening in reality. And we have seen that too many times in our constitution, in our society, that people hide behind certain things. Whilst the law may appear clear, the practice is not clear, it gets hidden up. To come to the issue of lawyers and they touting people, I don't think I want to enter into that domain. It's because you know, you have to then prepare a case and so forth. But actually, it's not an issue. It's just bad ethics that are taking place because people are trying to make money in our country. I think somebody will have to take that. Did I interview the NGO boss? The answer is no. I didn't do that because I thought I had received enough information from the managers of the board to understand that there were issues of governance. So I didn't actually, maybe some of them do have boards, but for example, the relationship between Musiho and Takane, I tried to probe what was happening there with the board. I didn't speak to the members of the board, but obviously there is an interaction there that breaches good corporate governance in that process. But specifically to answer your question, no, I didn't interview them. The NGOs, should I have renamed them? That was not my mandate. I could only see that they are operating under invalid licenses, so I can't give them a new name. I should just describe what I found, and that's all. But if people want to go into a nomenclature issue, it's a nice hobby to have. Um, did I give individual deaths? Remember that I was given a cohort to analyze. And when you do that, you try to remove individuals. You try to see how many people died from, for example, dehydration. And you don't say so and so died this way, so and so died that way. And you try to present it in a manner that, first of all, anonymizes people, because then somebody's gonna, when they look for through Paya or whatever you call them, they're gonna say, what did this one die of? What did this one, you know, when was this? When did this diarrhea start? Now you go into a process that takes away the comprehensiveness of the analysis. So the 36 patients that for whom the MEC gave us the details, the analysis of their death as a cohort is in the report. Remember that the other patients that came by, we don't have their complete files like we have of those 36 because the MEC and her department had to prepare them. The others I'm still receiving now are people that died maybe even during the period, but I'm only discovering them now, and I've got to look for their files and so forth. So there is a problem about the details that we have. We can confirm that they are no longer alive, but we don't necessarily have the comprehensive details through which we can analyze them. But the 37 or 38 that we received, their details have been analyzed and they are part of the analysis here. So I think we must just get an understanding of that, that was the original thing. But also, I didn't mention this. When the MEC made the decision, the announcement in Parliament, in the legislature, that there were 36 people died, when you look at the dates of death, actually 77 people had already died by that time. So it wasn't like, I mean, if she had been operating in a system where the information systems were up to scratch, she should have known almost instantly who had died in the system in mental health because she just got a directorate. But she didn't know on that day, but she also didn't know in November on the 29th when I asked her. So I don't know whether you can call that a lag period. I mean, you're having a national disaster, and by the end of 10 weeks, you still don't know what's happening in the system. So that was a big problem. Now, in terms of the NGOs, you know, the NGOs, remember, are under the MEC. They are the ones that audit them, they recommend them, they sort of assess them. So if you're going to deal with their legalities, you've got to deal with them through the provinces, through the MEC or the structure which is called the Mental Health Directorate. So I didn't feel that I should be specifying that because they are actually the NGOs within the province. Are there NGOs there that were okay? I think I mentioned in my report that there were 11 NGOs where no death occurred. I I have to say they were not licensed. So I'm not condoning the fact that because they were unlicensed and then death occurred, they are okay. It's just statistically it didn't happen. And it's also fair to record that not every NGO death occurred, because it would be wrong to paint a picture like if you go to every NGO, statistically you may not die because, as I say, 11, no one died there. They are still unlicensed, and we need to deal with that in the legal framework. Now, did they know what they were doing? I think there is no excuse in law for not knowing. I think the law says that even in simple English, that there's no remedy for you not knowing the law and making mistakes. You know, you have to know. But importantly, they knew that they had no staff. They knew that they had no professional staff. They knew that they were not being paid, and they had not actually organized the system of their own being resourced properly. All of those things were quite clear, but of course they will make a different argument, and maybe that's why it's important, I think, to meet with this thing. Who is responsible, James? I thought I identified the people that are responsible. And again, I want to narrow this and maybe answer your other question. We have 9 provincial MECs. They are not appointed by the National Minister of Health. They are appointed by their premiers. So that's a very big issue. And then you expect the same National Minister of Health to oversee the whole health about people that he had no hand in appointing, in their competence, in whether they share the same visions as him or her. So you have a problem of, as I said, the rules that we have or the acts that we have that facilitate a separation, but then pretend somewhere that somebody else above is responsible. You can't have that. It's a very big contradiction. How can Minister Mutwaledi be responsible for people that he did not appoint? Because they will say, you didn't appoint me, I was appointed by the Premier. That's one angle. The other angle, as I say, it's the act that actually facilitates a culture of not a common purpose, where, of course, because I've got power, I can do what I like. It's allowed in the act, and therefore, when I do what I like, I've got a cover under an act that is there in our laws, and it makes that different. Now, the other thing that you asked me was what are in the powers of this. Let's remember that, as I say, mental health care was, and the contracts before, were all powers that are within the national minister. And when we changed the National Act in 2002, we removed many powers that resided within the national government and put them in the provincial government. And I think we need to re-examine all of those things that were taken away. Mental health just happens to be one of those. But there were several other areas in the health system that allowed for this so-called concurrence things to happen. But I mean, I leave that to lawyers to actually re-examine the old acts, the new acts, in relation to the Constitution, and try and harmonize them. Because, as I say, certain powers and certain things are becoming more important nationally, whose powers cannot reside in the province, and maybe certain powers that should not reside in the national minister either. So I think it should not be simply looked in one direction. I think it should be looked in all directions. And finally, just to come to the law, remember that, you know, we are now 22 years into a democracy. Okay. Yesterday, I was sitting in a meeting of higher education at the NPC. And everybody was saying, you know, in 1996 we had the National Commission on Higher Education, and it made broad recommendations. But what were the things that it didn't make recommendation about? It did not make any recommendations about fees. They knew it was a discussion, there were task teams, about fees in 1996 when we were sitting in the National Commission. We made absolutely no recommendations. Today, 23 years, the students are roaming all over the place and say fees must fall. It's as if we never knew. We knew it, but we did nothing. The second, it was the knowledge project. What kind of knowledge were we going to teach? Who were we going to teach it for? We all knew that we live in Africa, we have our own histories, we've got our, and these are not part of our knowledge system. We're still learning about other people that have got no existential processes with us, but we know so much about them. You know, my kids know more about Prince Diana than they would never know about Shaka. It doesn't bother them that they should know about Shaka, but if they don't know about Prince Diana, they get very anxious. You know, they feel out of place. Why do we have this kind of thing? They knew that in 1995, they did nothing about it. And the reason was, and the confession comes out, they were all afraid of the historic white universities. They couldn't raise these issues because they were afraid of VETS, UCT, former Natal, roads. So we have had a conversation that we now can revisit 22 years. And I suspect that even with the Health Acts and other acts, we were doing these things sheepishly, we were still new, we didn't know what we were doing. I think we have learned something. We can now be a little bit more bolder and be ourselves in a new country that we feel much more comfortable, that we are part of it or we can shape it. I don't think in 1994, you know, people felt strong enough. As they say in my mother tongue, you know, we always deferred to them. Even though we were with them talking, we deferred most things to them, and that's where we are. What do we do now? I agree with the issue of inquest. I think I just maybe didn't have it here. It's because I knew that Section 27 were already taking the inquest. I think that should happen. It's a legal process on its own, and I was told not to actually get too involved in it when I sought advice, but it's an important process that must take place, and I think that requires answers and so forth. How do I fix the system? As I said, I think this is for the minister to fix the system. That's why he's employed as a minister. But I really just think sometimes we have created laws that tie his hands at the moment. And I think we need to, now 22 years into the process, I think we need to open up and say, we want to shape our country, we want to open it up. We are a little bit much more stronger and much more confident than we were 22 years ago. How do we change and how do we update the laws that we made, that we made a little bit being inexperienced? And I think there will be no harm in that. We are a society that is evolving. I don't think, as most of the people that are in government